Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Probably no need for a leg stretch. I know it's Friday. This is the last session. I just want to pick up from our first speaker from GWP, Kidane, where he's actually made the point that water needs to be understood within its very broader context as far as industrial development is concerned. Often we forget that unlike other industrial sectors where goods may be manufactured or produced as commodities, water is a natural resource, and it serves as a key input to industrial development. So it's really a catalyst, it's an enabler, and I think this context is important that you understand that, particularly from an industrial perspective. Of course, in the absence of water, it also poses key constraints to both industry and various other sectors. But of course, the opportunity lies in its security, and not only from an availability perspective, but also resource quality perspective. So that's really a key point that I'd like to make as far as why water matters is concerned. So going into the presentation itself, I'll just take us briefly through the strategic context and challenges facing the water sector, and then also focusing on current development and trends with regards to water security, both from a quality and quantity perspective, particularly for economic development and industrialization. Lastly, I would just like to focus on some examples that we have as the CSIR, looking at some technologies and intervention, and perhaps more also on some of our capabilities that we deploy as far as water is concerned. The overall strategic context, in this slide we can see that typically South Africa follows an international context as far as water security is concerned. This has been recognized internationally by the World Economic Forum in the Global Risk Report, which I'll also talk about later. But typically our own approach is well captured even in our legislation and as far as our strategic planning documentation is concerned. Our very own Department of Science and Technology has also set a good pathway in terms of the key R&D needs for water going forward and how those should be addressed. And it's typically along the lines of demand and supply. Again, just to highlight that this 10-year roadmap, it's very much focusing on demand and supply, both from a quality and quantity perspective. But how do we look at water from the CSR side? As far as our own mandate is concerned, we follow the international context. We look at what's happening in the region, we look at what's happening in the continent. And our shareholders compact that the board has signed off clearly makes sure that we don't get lost as far as that international and continental track is concerned. Yes, we do have pressing issues locally, but those needs to be understood within the international context, particularly within the SADC region where we are concerned. Now, when we look at the hydrological linkages for water, it is anything that goes between biosphere to atmosphere, the linkages in between. And that's basically what I wanted to highlight in this particular slide. A major global risk, well recognized. We would probably not think of water crisis to be among the top 5 of global risks as far as our global risk landscape is concerned. And this has been the case since 2012, where water crisis has emerged as a central feature as far as this global risk is concerned. So there's no longer an issue of us treating water perhaps as a luxury item or our impact on water, but more the impact of water on our business is certainly an area that we need to consider going forward. And you can see the interconnectedness as far as the other 5 areas are concerned, from unemployment to state collapse or crisis, social instability. Water pretty much features within those lists. Whilst it is a global risk, at the same time also we have economic growth opportunities as far as job creation is concerned, because water does stimulate your GDP growth. There's a number of water-dependent jobs that are being created, and if we just look at this particular slide, we can see the percentage of water-dependent jobs being created in those manufacturing companies as far as the African continent is concerned. And I'm not going to run through all of them. It's just to give us a sense that throughout the continent, water's got a key role to play as far as job creation is concerned. So this UN report shows the percentage of jobs that's being created by these water-dependent manufacturing industries in those selected African countries. So whilst we manage to create jobs through water-dependent industries, we can't ignore the business risks that water poses at the same time. And it ranges from companies experiencing various impacts on water, both security and availability of supply, and these result, of course, in financial impacts that you can't certainly ignore. The IPCC reports are also clear as far as the global population exposure to a decrease of renewable water resources are concerned. This is information that most of us probably all know, because I know that we've also participated in the session here on sustainable economic growth. But these linkages, we need to emphasize that we can't ignore that when we talk water for industrial development. So it's very important that we take this into account. I also want to just highlight briefly around the interdependencies. I've just indicated that the session we had earlier in here was focusing on the linkages between water, energy, climate, and food security. This is just a typical example of how we see the water, energy, food nexus playing out. And these are just some of the primary processes between water and energy and how those interfaces are taking place. And on top of that, you put climate change. So clearly there's strong interdependencies as far as water's rightful space is concerned within the water, energy, food nexus. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but I just want to re-emphasize the point again. Environmental sustainability and industry, for those of us who participated in the session on sustainable economic growth, previously in this session here, we've had a long discussion around the trade-offs between water, energy, food, and climate. And quite clearly, water's pivotal role in achieving environmental sustainability can no longer be argued, especially when it comes to securing the low-carbon transition. For South Africa, of course, we're not in a unique situation ourselves. We sit in a global village, and we face the same constraints that others are facing as far as the relationships between ecosystems and water management are concerned. But in there also reside benefits that are mutually beneficial, especially if we take into account the water footprint and green infrastructure that I'm also going to talk about in a short while. So what are those opportunities for industry? We just heard Graham earlier emphasizing the point around spatial planning, which is very critical. So we need to have a good understanding of our consumption and how we manage our consumption by all utilities. So whilst this focus is on industry, one can probably look at those incentives for water use minimization, and you can apply it to various other sectors as well. On the other hand, you also need to look at water security and independence, where the demand and competition for water is increasing between various sectors. So what do we need to do? We need to come up with smarter technologies in terms of smart water use, and of course for us, the opportunities for industries, particularly within the treatment technology space for wastewater. But, and this is a big but, I can't overemphasize the importance of management and operational interventions. And I think this is a point that we often lose out when we talk research, development, and innovation. I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the challenges and dynamics as far as the South African context is concerned, looking at the regional outlook, for instance, where we can clearly see that on the African continent, we probably have one of the most shared basins. So benefit sharing and transboundary water resource management is no longer a nice to have within South Africa, especially in our case where we share more than 50% of our water resources with 6 neighboring countries. If you look at our 4 river systems in South Africa, it covers about 60% of land area, but what is significant here is that it contributes 45% of total river flow and 70% of GDP. And I'm not sure, Desigan, whether we should include Lesotho in that discussion, because it's quite a bold statement to make in terms of GDP. Our upstream neighbors would like to have a stake in those statements as well. When we talk about challenges for the country in terms of supply and quality, over and above the fact that on the eastern side we managed to get some rainfall, we should not dispute the fact that our high evaporation rates on the western side makes this an even more interesting case for us in terms of our interbasin transfers. So for us in terms of availability of supply, we have major concerns, just from a natural resource management perspective. In terms of quality, there's a whole range of water quality aspects that we need to consider. Now I understand for industry, where we do not have bulk of water being allocated to industry, the big issue for us is particularly on water quality. And that is an aspect that we need to consider. Current development trends, I think probably as a country, we are spoiled for choices in terms of our interventions, from water loss control to water use efficiency, augmentation of your local supply, effluent reuse, desalination, and interbasin transfers. Maybe we need to create a crisis where we only need to look at one intervention option. And perhaps the benefits will pay off, because there seems to be not a concerted effort with a range of options that we have. And that's just the point that I want to make. As far as our water use per sector is concerned, we can see that whilst agriculture is taking up a large portion of water being allocated, and I want to be quite clear on that, 67%, that's allocated water. What we're still going through is to verify how much of water is actually being used. And that will obviously change that particular picture as well. For mining and urban, we can see the percentages being slightly lower than irrigation, but the key issue for us with these industries is particularly around water quality. One of the important things that we also need to consider is that our estimated replacement value of water infrastructure and resources in the country is sitting at 1.3 trillion, not million, that's just a typo there. And that's taken directly from Water Affairs. They've published this last year. On top of that, the average investment required over the next 10 years is sitting at 855 billion. So just looking at that from an infrastructure perspective, we can immediately see the opportunities, but of course it's not straightforward. And there's a whole range of complications that you need to unlock to tap into that. Now, if you look at the functional landscape of our sectoral players within the value chain, we can see again here that water management respects no boundaries when it comes to your administrative and functional arrangements, because you're looking at the resource on the water resource side, and you also look at supply, and there are different role players in between. But what is important, especially for the industry, is that in South Africa, the water industry, so-called industry, mainly comprised of regulators, water boards, national agencies, and other public entities. So we can see this continuum between our private sector and public sector. And you can't provide interventions without looking at both. So we're sitting in a space where water is regulated well within the public sector, but you can't enforce your interventions without bringing private sector on board. So your private-public partnerships in South Africa is probably a key mechanism to drive any interventions that you would like to achieve in the country. Your institutional arrangements at the same time from a geographical perspective, and I'm not going to dwell much on whether we should decentralize water or centralize, go for a centralized approach. We probably all know that as far as your catchment management agencies are concerned, we're again looking at how we can manage that more from a central perspective. But the point that I would just like to make here is that the establishment of catchment management agencies is an important building block for institutional management and arrangement, managing the country's water resources at different levels. And in South Africa, we have moved from trying to establish 19 institutions to about 9 CMAs. And there is discussions now on the table as to how we're going to manage them, again, from a central point, which makes for quite an interesting discussion. Now, if we go through the water value chain, there's a whole range of opportunities and interventions, both on the water resources side and also on the supply side. Within a catchment, of course, we've just heard Graham talking earlier on about spatial planning and water being a key input. Clearly, there's immediate opportunities for the protection of the resource and decision support systems. I'm not going to dwell a lot on that, but as far as your infrastructure is also concerned, we need to look at what are the regulatory frameworks for infrastructure. To what extent do we decide we're going to dredge or not? Are there regulatory framework? How does the regulator goes about it? So there are particular gaps in that particular regard. The treatment of water when it comes to resource quality perspective, pricing that's supposed to be based on a polluter-based principle, your waste discharge charge system, those are things that we know as a country still needs some improvement before it can be implemented quite successfully. And on the side of your supply side, there's also the issue of water service standards from an hygiene perspective that immediately appeals to an organization like the CSIR. But we also need to move from your high end to your low end, low cost technologies as far as FICO remediation is concerned for your treatment options. That's just another example. What does this mean for industry? For industry, I think we need to focus on reuse, recycling, and resource recovery. And this, of course, can be plugged right through various other sectors, but I think this is quite an important aspect for industry to consider. I'm just going to highlight some of the examples that we have here at the CSR as far as our interventions are concerned, and these are clustered within water availability and water quality. Looking at water quality, for instance, we have a whole range of low-cost technologies and also high-end technologies, looking at your pathogen detection, but we know that, for instance, your biodigesters for your waste treatment plants, these can be just brought off the shelf quite easily. Often, the issue for us is not how we develop new technologies, but how you deploy them in an integrated fashion to achieve more coherent impact as far as the sector is concerned. So this is just a range of technologies and interventions that we are concerned with as far as the water quality component is concerned. And you can see it's very much focused on pollution and remediation. Moving on to water use. At the same time, we keep saying that there's a demand that continues to increase for a resource that is limited. What that means is that we need to use water smart. And what are those smart water use technologies that we can consider? So for water use efficiency, there is quite a whole range of available interventions and technologies, ranging from measurements to agricultural biological control agents and water grid sensor, looking at how can water be used more smartly in terms of interfacing. And a lot of this deals with the different role players within the sector that you have, the interfacing between those role players in the functional arrangement as well as your geographical arrangement. And this can be applied, again, within our industrial development processes, but also other sectors. And I just wanted to highlight some of these. What is important, though, is that often it is not the development of new technology that gives the best or right answers. It's often the availability of existing technologies and how we deploy them in an integrated fashion. And I think the CSIR, being this multi-discipline organization, we have a good pool of a wide range of expertise and capabilities that we can draw from, for instance, biosciences to modeling and digital sciences, the natural resources and environment, to material sciences and manufacturing, ICT, as well as the built environment. And what we often do is we take these technologies and we look at what is the common objective or problem within the water space that we would like to solve. Some of the technologies here have been applied quite successfully in different spaces before, like logistics and transport, and we're now convening to say, how do we deploy these in a more coherent and integrated manner to achieve much more impact in terms of solving our water problems? And I think a multidisciplinary and integrated approach is probably going to be a key aspect that we need to consider in solving our water problems. Some remarks that I just want to leave with us before we go into the panel discussion is particularly around the global trend as far as your water innovation and technology is concerned. And these can easily be categorized into 3 R's: reduce, remediate, and reuse. And the CSIR, I've just listed some technologies that we have. Some of us have probably participated in the Blue Economy session just before this one, where we also have a range of cutting-edge technologies for the oil and gas companies for the oceans and coast space. My talk here is mainly focusing on freshwater and inland waters. Industrial water, of course, is becoming a fast-growing sector of the global water market. And each industry faces quite substantial challenges. So we need to look, for instance, at how can we come up with even smarter technologies and unlocking the opportunities that presents itself through this particular market that's been created. What it then means is that this SET solution provides, these areas provides major opportunities for our SET solutions to be deployed, because often what we find is that in the past we have an approach to solutions in a rather compartmental fashion, and we know that many of those technologies out there are now not being utilized, and often the CSR has been pulled in by our clients and partners to look at the range of technologies that they have, and our take is to look at what are the appropriateness of those technologies in terms of uptake. And there is a gap that we've certainly identified. But I'd like to quote the DDG DTI in my talk. I think this is a very critical aspect that we often forget when it comes to water for industrial development. He's saying that critical to economic growth is policy, alignment, and coherence. If we can't get this right as government, and at the same time the private sector can better organize itself in relation to water in the emerging industry, we will make progress. Because what we find is that we have an industry that is willing and able to provide the solutions that we're all trying to strive for, but if we have a government that's not meeting with industry needs, you often find that industry parks, and that's where some of our interventions and technologies are also not being taken up, and we need to open those discussions. My last slide here is just to leave 2 key messages with us today, and that is that water is a catalyst for industrialization. Its security is paramount. For industry, yes, there are opportunities. These opportunities is around reuse, recycling, and resource recovery. Whilst we have that discussion for industrialization, we can use these opportunities and also plug them into various other sectors. But I just thought for industry, these are the 3 areas that I think we can focus on going forward. Thanks, man.